Hi, it's Steve Rode, your Get Out of Debt guy. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably want to learn more about money, credit, and debt, or you're one of the many good people out there with bad debt and you want it to go away. But stick with me. Together we can make that happen. Either way, I'm here for you, and I believe a better and more financially successful future is ahead. It can be within your grasp. I'd like to ask you for a favor. If you find this or any of my podcasts helpful, please take a moment and leave a review on the podcast platform you're listening on. Your feedback and opinion matter to me, and if I've done a good job, your review helps others to find the podcast as well. And while you're there leaving your review, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you can be notified when the next episode comes out. Last piece of housekeeping. If you have a question or comment you'd like to hear on an upcoming podcast, you can leave me a voice message at getoutofdebt.org/message. Or leave me a question for me to answer on my website by going to getoutofdebt.org/question. Thank you so much for being a great listener, and I'm sending you a giant virtual hug in return. And now, on with the podcast. Did you know you can get your federal student loans forgiven if you go to prison? For people that react rather than research, that statement will lead them to have some strong opinions and reactions. The debate if people who go to prison should receive a second chance or access to benefits or even voting rights is irrelevant here. This podcast is not about that. I recently received a reader question from Nick. He said, I'm in a halfway house nearing the end of my federal incarceration. I will have completed 10 years and 4 months, and I've been looking into info on having my student loans written off. Now, my first thought was I didn't think that was possible to have federal student loans forgiven just for being in prison. But unfortunately, I've never met anyone that has, and everything that I've read to date has never indicated it was possible. Nick mentioned information from the National Consumer Law Center website that did mention a program where forgiveness was supposed to be possible. Their site does say there is some relief available for incarcerated individuals with pre-incarceration student loan debt. I wanted to know more, so I began to research the issue, and that research turned into a black pit of hours and hours of trying to find the truth. I'm shocked at how long it took to dig deep and figure this all out. After doing the research and posting my answer, I received a nice comment from Nick. Nick said, hey, I just want to say again how amazing your work on this is. You don't know how much we who have been in or still in prison are met with situations in which we just don't get help. I mean, we can't find help. I mean, those in positions to help, positions where they are hired solely to help us, just don't help. We're met with people's backs, quite often literally. So, for me to ask you a question and not even knowing how complicated that the answer would be, and for you to give such a deep, detailed answer, floored me. Well, Nick, you're welcome. I don't judge people unless they're rude, obnoxious predators or scammers that intentionally harm people physically, emotionally, or financially. I eventually found the answer to this question, but the result is not going to make anyone happy. The Private Collection Agency Manual, known as the PCA Manual, is what companies are supposed to follow when attempting to collect on delinquent student loan debt. And it does contain a provision for federal student loan forgiveness based on incarceration. Now, that fact alone is just going to piss some people off. Some people will say, that's insane and we shouldn't do that. Well, maybe not. You could argue that many federal student loans should never have been given out in the first place. However, with the growing numbers of indebted people, it will be an ever-increasing statistical reality that people with federal student loans will wind up in prison. Putting your emotional reaction aside, how are people in prison getting access to loan servicers that can help them decide how to deal with their delinquent loan payments. And then how would someone incarcerated even make student loan payments? The last public copy of the often secret PCA manual contains a process to deal with student loans of locked up student loan debtors. The directions to the collection company says if the prisoner is incarcerated exceeding 9 months, but less than 10 years, then the loan should be put on hold and labeled incarceration collectible. They should be returned to collections at the borrower's earliest possible release date. But here's the interesting part that will surprise you. The same PCA manual also says if the borrower is to be incarcerated for more than 10 years, they could be written off as incarceration write-off. But like everything else in life, there's more to the story. If you read the directions more than 4 times, you might notice the exact wording of the guidance. It actually says, if the borrower is to be incarcerated for a period exceeding 10 years or more from the time of submission, not the time that they went to jail, but the time that the application for forgiveness is submitted. So it appears the PCA manual is talking about the amount of time left to be incarcerated from the date the application for forgiveness is received. The requirements to make this application are so unlikely to be met that I would be shocked if any prisoner ever had any federal student loans forgiven, unless they were serving a life sentence. In my post at getoutofdebt.org/16132, I detail all the hoops and hurdles that must be jumped through or over. You can also find the post with all the reference information in it if you go to getoutofdebt.org and search for how to get your federal student loans forgiven if you go to prison. The documentation requirements established to have federal student loans forgiven might as well say you need to submit a valid DNA test from the Loch Ness Monster. But this is not an isolated Department of Education black hole. Others exist, like trying to wiggle your way or get out of a spousal consolidation loan after the spouse dies or you get divorced. You can't. And consider the disregard the Department of Education under the Trump administration gave programs like the loan forgiveness under the Borrower Defense to Repayment and Public Service Loan Forgiveness programs. People who were found to be victims of for-profit schools could not get their loans forgiven, even though the rules clearly said they should. Military members, law enforcement, firefighters, teachers, and more that should have been a slam dunk for the President Bush loan forgiveness program for public servants were denied en masse for forgiveness. And that's forgiveness they were promised. There is currently an effort to correct those wrongs, but I can't imagine anyone at the Department of Education private collection company investing the time and energy to meet the requirements to submit a federal loan forgiveness request. Even if they were, you'd have to make sure the demand for forgiveness was received and submitted with more than 10 years remaining on the sentence. After researching this, I would be astonished if anyone had loans forgiven even though the program exists. Between the lack of awareness by incarcerated debtors and collection companies helping to submit the information, this seems to be a program nobody will complete. Federal student loans are all messed up. As it stands today, we hand out loans to anyone, regardless of their ability to repay, and for any degree at nearly any school. As a result, the vast majority of those folks will never graduate and the loans will be unaffordable. Some of those folks might find themselves in prison with no ability to make payments on the loans. They might try to get their loans forgiven, but will only run into people not willing to help. I'm not sure if this is all a dark comedy or a tragic drama. Till next time, I'm Steve Rode, your Get Out of Debt guy. If you have a question you'd like to ask me, well, just visit my site at getoutofdebt.org and click the Ask a Question link near the top of the site.